YouTube. Today's video is going to discuss the I always knew narrative that we see kind of prevalent throughout the trans community, where it's basically the idea that a trans person knows that they're trans from as early as possible. And so I'm not saying that this isn't a legitimate narrative for transgender people, because I'm sure that it is. It wasn't in my case, but that doesn't mean that it isn't for other people, including trans kids, things like that. People come to terms with their gender at all sorts of different points throughout their lives for all sorts of various different reasons. So that's not really what I'm discussing here. What I'm discussing is the need to prove sort of a scientific rationale for being trans, because ultimately sort of saying you knew as soon as you knew what gender was is basically saying that this is natural, this wasn't a choice, things like that. Because the idea is that if this is scientific, if this is naturally occurring, that therefore kind of your anti-trans opponents have to now suddenly respect our existence, because science, as though science really is useful in politics, given everything that we see out there today. Wait, no, it's not. So science isn't really going to change the mind of a transphobe, a bigot, and I don't think the science argument really matters too much there. Now, I do understand that the I always knew kind of line mattered quite a bit historically within the trans community, because gatekeepers for medical transition, so the therapists who would get you access to HRT, to surgery, kind of wanted to hear a sort of specific by-the-book type of narrative. I think in other cases, it's people trying to prove that they are somehow more trans than other people, because if I knew I was trans at puberty, but somebody else knew they were trans at age 4, that means they're closer to a real woman or something like that. Not that people are making that argument when they say they knew at age 4 or whatever, but there are some people who kind of want to go on and on about how transitioning as soon as possible means you're somehow more authentic than people who wait until later in life, for whatever reason they may wait for. But the idea that being trans has to be biological in origin, which I honestly think it is. I think probably the scientific explanation is that something happens during development in the womb that sort of doesn't flip a switch somewhere that it should, and this is why you end up with trans people. Similarly, you end up with all sorts of various intersex conditions, and it's just random chance of nature. But even if there wasn't a biological or scientific explanation for being trans, if being trans was purely a choice, it should be okay, it should be respected. And so relying on, sort of scientific evidence as the justification for why pro-trans, or at least neutral laws exist, really isn't sufficient in my book. And so that's why it's not something that I'm really particularly interested in advocating for or promoting a lot of that. I don't really care where being trans came from. I just care what people are going to do about it. And so that is where I choose to focus, and that's where I think a lot of other people should focus. But that's how I feel about the I always knew type of narrative.